What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Planning for Retirement podcast. My name is Kevin Lau. I am your host. Today, we're going to be addressing this question. What if you live to be 100 years old? Because I think a lot of people, when they plan to retire or they're about to retire, they think, hey, you know what? I need my portfolio to last 15, 20, or 25 years, maybe even 30 years if they're being conservative. But here's the reality. If you retired at 60, or even before 60, and you live to be 100, that's a 40-year time horizon in retirement. Meaning it's quite possible you're going to be retired longer than you were in the workforce, which sounds amazing on paper, but it definitely brings about an entirely different set of issues. And this topic comes off of the heels of last week's episode where I talked a little about Elon Musk and how he referenced the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, and his quote about potentially doubling life expectancy in the next 5 to 10 years. Do I think that's aggressive? I mean, sure, but nobody knows what the future is going to hold. And the speed at which technology is evolving over the last, let's say 5, 10, 15 years, why couldn't that continue to accelerate also in the modern medicine space? I think it already has. So I think it's definitely a question that we need to address. We need to be honest about this one. Okay. And so, am I going to go out there and assume our clients are going to, live to be 150, 160 years old? Probably not right now. Okay. I'm not at that point yet, but I am definitely at the point where assuming an average life expectancy of, let's say 80 or 85 years old, that is a recipe for disaster, because what if our clients lived another 15 or 20 years? That's not going to bode well for them. Okay. So my point is simple. If AI and technology helps us live longer, you don't need to save less, okay? Contrary to what Elon said last week, you don't need to save less. We addressed that already, but retirement planning and being thoughtful about how you set up your plan is going to be that much more important. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about 5 specific retirement planning considerations if you're planning for longevity, okay? Maybe it's 100, maybe you're planning to live until even 95 years old, okay? I would still say that is longer than the average life expectancy, no question. But maybe you even live past 100 years old. So we're going to address this because longevity is going to be one of the biggest risks for retirees that are retiring in 2026 and in the next handful of years. Okay, so the first one is at the core of what we do for our clients, and that's creating paychecks in retirement. So this is going to be the core of any retirement plan. Of course, it's retirement income. It's generating cash flow, because at the end of the day, what are you going to do with assets that are not generating cash flow? So your retirement plan is not just about your portfolio, but it's about building a lifetime income that never runs out. Okay? Because retirement is definitely easier when your baseline necessities, your fixed expenses, even maybe some of your discretionary expenses are covered by guaranteed income sources. I can promise you that those people that we serve, they are sleeping like a baby, especially when the markets are volatile, okay? And if we can get most of those expenses covered by those guaranteed income sources, that's a valuable conversation to address this longevity risk. Obviously, one of the most popular guaranteed income sources that all of you most likely qualify for is Social Security. It's going to be the biggest lifetime income stream, guaranteed lifetime income stream for most of your retirement plans, okay? So considering the idea of potentially delaying your benefits until 70, or potentially delaying if you're married, the larger of the two benefits. That way you maximize the surviving spouse's benefits, because maybe you don't live until 100, but maybe your spouse lives until 100. These are very important considerations, very important value adds, even if you have a pension. Okay, I know pensions are going by the wayside, but a lot of the folks we serve have a pension. And considering those survivor benefit options is going to be critical, because again, just because you don't plan to live until 100, maybe your spouse does. And as we know, when one of you passes away, the surviving spouse is not going to keep both Social Security checks. They're going to collect one of the Social Security checks, and that's going to be the larger of the two benefits. So that's why delaying that, the larger of the two Social Security benefits is certainly a consideration with this notion of living until 100, or this notion of addressing longevity. But the pension is the same thing, because I oftentimes see this where clients are like, I want to maximize what we're getting, my spouse and I are getting during our lifetime. And they select maybe a 25 or 50% survivor benefit option. But if that individual passes, Social Security is not only going to drop, but also now that pension is going to drop by potentially 50% or more. Okay. So super important to address those. Now, the other guaranteed income source is a 4-letter word for a lot of you, but this is annuities. And this is one of those things. It's, I almost feel like it's become mainstream to bash annuities. And I'm coming here to say that I don't even sell annuities, but considering the benefits of what an annuity provides, the clients that have annuities, I've never heard them say, you know what, Kevin, I wish I didn't have that guaranteed income coming in. I wish I didn't have that fixed paycheck coming in that stacks on top of my Social Security or stacks on top of my Social Security and my pension. I've never heard that. It's usually the opposite. It's like, oh, markets are volatile. I wish I had something safe. I wish I had something that was guaranteed paycheck that I can never outlive. That is what an annuity provides. And I know there's a lot of bad apples out there. There's a lot of bad products out there that are being sold in the retirement space, but it's a conversation that needs to be addressed. Does it make sense to introduce, as part of your retirement income plan, some form of annuities? So if we break down your expenses, let's say into needs, wants, and wishes. Okay, this is a quick exercise for all of you. Break down all of your expenses into needs, wants, and wishes. Or if you want, just do 2 categories, fixed expenses and discretionary expenses. And then figure out how much of those fixed expenses are being covered by your guaranteed income sources. If Social Security is covering all of those, perfect. You may not really need annuities. You may not need additional guaranteed income. But if it's going to add value, if it's going to give you a little bit more peace of mind to have additional guaranteed income that maybe not only covers all of your fixed expenses, but even some of your discretionary expenses, more power to you. Okay. On the flip side, let's say your guaranteed income sources are only covering 30% or 40% of your total expenses. That might be a little bit of a concern, especially when we have volatility in the market. I promise you right now, if you're not retired, I'm telling you this because we serve clients that are already retired. Many of them have annuities, but many of them don't have annuities. And again, I've never had this conversation where someone has regretted turning some of their assets, a portion of their assets, into a fixed annuity stream. Okay. So come up with that percentage. What percentage of your total expenses are being covered by guaranteed income sources? If Social Security is taking care of you, great. Move on to the next thing. If it's not taking care of all those fixed expenses, you may want to layer on additional fixed income, and annuities could be one of those tools in the tool belt. So again, if you live to be 100, your biggest fear shouldn't be the market. It should be the fear of running out of money, running out of paychecks. Super important to address. Okay, number 2 is, it's a concept that I feel like is becoming a little bit easier for folks to grasp, but still not mainstream. Okay. Because oftentimes when folks retire, big box firms push them into portfolios that are more conservative because the traditional line of thinking is, hey, you're retired now. Let's be more conservative because you're living on your portfolio. But you're not living on 100% of your portfolio in year 1. You may be living on 4% or 5% of your portfolio, maybe 6 or 7%. Okay. Even that range, anywhere from 4 to 7 is a good starting point in terms of year 1 rate of withdrawal. And if you're too conservative, you have other risks that come into the picture, inflation being one of those. And then now we're talking about living until 100. Longevity is another. And the longer you live, the more inflation is a risk. So I see this time and time again where I'm talking to folks who reach out to us or clients that are getting ready to retire. And the mindset is because they've been trained, and even us as advisors, we've been trained to get conservative. Okay. But this may not be the right plan for you. Okay. Because the longer retirement is, the more inflation compounds. And so the risk isn't just volatility, it's being too conservative and not keeping pace with inflation. Okay. And the best hedge against inflation is traditional stocks, equities in the portfolio. And if you're trimming your equities to the point where now you don't have enough in terms of long-term rate of return to keep pace or even exceed inflation, that to me is a bigger risk than being too aggressive. Okay. So stress test your plan, stress test your allocation. Look at the 60-40. That's been the traditional model. When folks retire, that 60-40 approach has been one of the most popular. But then stress test it. Okay. What if you lived 40 years in retirement? Does that 60-40 portfolio hold up? Okay. Or do you need to take on a little bit more risk? Do you need to be maybe 75% in equities? Okay. Bill Bengen, the famous 4% rule, the godfather of 4% rule, he talked about this. He advocated for this. Yes, he used a baseline balanced approach for his 4% rule study, but he also stress tested all the allocations. And what he came to the conclusion of is that he said he would recommend a minimum of 50%, but getting as close as you're able to 75% in stocks and 25% in fixed income. Yeah, he believes that's the sweet spot. And I don't disagree with him. Having stress tested plans now and sort of pushing these out from, let's say, 90 to 95 and even 100 years old, that 60-40 portfolio could sometimes carry more risk than a little bit more aggressive portfolio. I'm not talking about swinging for the fences and putting all of your money on AI stocks. That's not what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about a well-diversified pool of equities that can help you hedge against that inflation risk, which then helps with that longevity concern that we're talking about today. But if you go that route, if you are more aggressive, you do have the risk of sequence of returns hitting you early on in retirement. If you go through a bear market, if you go through a recession in those first 2 to 3 years, that is a recipe for disaster. And nobody can time the market, unfortunately. Okay? I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you exactly when the next bear market's going to happen. Don't have that. So guardrails to me are one of the most important things that you can implement if you are going to be a little bit more aggressive with your investment portfolio to try to hedge against this inflation and longevity risk. Okay. So if you're not familiar with guardrails or the concept of guardrails, Guyton-Klinger, they're the most famous, their study is, in my opinion, the most famous in the industry that explains guardrails. And they have 4 decision rules that they address. The first is the inflation rule. The second is the prosperity rule. The third is the portfolio rescue rule. And then the fourth is the portfolio management rule. And if you follow those 4 rules throughout the duration of your retirement, it can dramatically increase your starting rate of withdrawal, but also reduce the risk of running out of money if you're a little aggressive with your investment portfolio. If you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into those rules, I put a free PDF in the show notes. Just go ahead and download that, take a look at it. If you have any questions, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you over email. So I would say the most dangerous retirement portfolio is the one that feels safe on paper. Okay, yeah, may make you feel, sleep well at night, but essentially it quietly lags behind inflation throughout the duration. And if we're talking about a 35, 40, 45-year retirement, that becomes a big concern. Okay, number 3, it's something that nobody likes to think about. I don't like to think about it for myself. I don't like to think about this for my parents or any loved ones, but Father Time is undefeated. Okay, at the end of the day, we're all going to get old. We're all going to get frail at some point in time. And some of us may need care at the end of life. Okay, help with day-to-day living activities. And so the third thing I would say is you need to have a plan to address long-term care. And I'm not saying you need to buy long-term care insurance. I think that's oftentimes the default for folks listening to the podcast or even clients that we talk to is like, well, should I buy insurance or not? And usually they stop at that decision. I'm not talking about just buying insurance. On the flip side, I'm talking about the idea that, yes, long-term care insurance could absolutely help with a long-term care event, but having a plan, whether it's a dedicated pool of funds or potentially buying insurance or potentially using home equity. There are several different ways that you can set aside funds just in case, because the reality is not everyone's going to need care. Some of us may pass away unexpectedly and never need any care at the end of our life. But many of us, especially what we're talking about with this longevity and, this living to 100 concept, is that it's more likely than not that we're going to become frail at some point in time. And one of the common things that I hear from all of our clients that we serve is, you know what, Kevin, I never want to be a burden on my loved ones. And so it's an interesting dynamic because a lot of the folks we serve have plenty of money in retirement. They have plenty of money to spend on their go-go years, even in their slow-go and no-go years, and still have a buffer left over to either pay for long-term care expenses or leave a financial legacy. But they're afraid to spend. And because one of the concerns that many people have is it's lingering in the back of their mind. It's like, what if I have a big expense for healthcare at the end of my life? What if I need long-term care? What if my spouse and I both need long-term care at the end of the life? Okay. This is a common concern. And again, it's not about, buying insurance or not buying insurance, but buying insurance from my perspective can oftentimes give those individuals freedom to spend their assets, freedom to spend down their portfolio, whereas otherwise they might have that concern if they do not have long-term care insurance, even if they have the means to self-fund. Okay, Warren Buffett has long-term care insurance. He can easily self-fund and pay for care, even if he needed care for 100 years. But he has long-term care insurance. Why is that? He doesn't want to have his heirs, his beneficiaries, go through a fire sale of amazing investments that he wants to keep in the family to pay for care. Instead, he'd much rather have them not pay any taxes, take the long-term care reimbursements, and pay for care that way. And it also creates a dedicated pool of money to essentially give that caregiver, that spouse, those adult children, permission to hire. Okay, because again, even if there's plenty of money set aside in a 401k, plenty of money set aside in a taxable brokerage account or a Roth IRA, that other spouse that's potentially going to live another 15, 20 years after you pass away or after the first spouse passes away, they're also worried about their longevity of the portfolio. So oftentimes they may not give themselves permission to spend down the money, even if it's there, unless they have long-term care insurance. So I feel, in my opinion, that this just gives people a little bit more confidence to enjoy their retirement, not have to worry about preserving all of this for this unexpected event, because at the end of the day, 70% of people are going to need some sort of care, but how long is that going to last for? Is it cognitive? Is it physical? Does it last 2 years? Does it last 10 years? Okay. So I think it's one of those things, like I said, nobody wants to address, but long-term care planning is not necessarily just a money problem. It's a logistics problem. And that could become a money issue, okay, if it's not addressed up front, okay, because it creates complexity. There's confusion around what assets are for what assets are for the surviving spouse versus legacy. It gets a little bit tricky, a little bit complicated, okay? And when you think about legacy, it's not just about what you leave behind, it's how you're remembered. And nobody wants to be remembered by being a burden on any loved ones, okay? Being a burden on our adult children. Okay, so address the long-term care plan, communicate that long-term care plan. Okay, if you go the route of self-funding, have that conversation with your beneficiaries, have that conversation with your trustees, your powers of attorney, even your spouse. Okay, because oftentimes, especially you listen to the podcast, most likely you're the CFO of the household. You're the ones making these financial decisions day to day, and opposites attract. Your spouse may not be interested in this. So having that conversation around, hey, this is the pool of funds we're going to use to dedicate for long-term care, or hey, worst case scenario, if we need this, tap into our home equity. Okay. I don't want you spending your physical energy, your mental energy on doing the caregiving. Of course, it's going to be stressful for everybody if anybody needs long-term care. Okay. But at least you can remove that financial burden from your spouse and all the decisions that go along around planning for care and caregiving for someone who's aging. Address it, communicate it, have a plan. Okay. Number 4. The spending mindset is a big one, okay? Because if you're retiring at 60, live until 100, again, we talked about this, 40 years of retirement. And I think this idea that we're going to plug in some numbers in a financial planning software, whatever those goals are, maybe it's travel, golf trips, or maybe it's lifetime giving to your children or grandchildren or a second home, whatever it is. If you just assume those expenses, those goals are going to stay the same throughout the 40 years that you're on this planet in retirement and adjust those for inflation every year, you might end up underspending in retirement, and you might actually end up retiring too late, okay? Because retirement actually has 3 distinct phases. We have the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. The go-go years, early retirement, you're still active, you're physically able to do the things you want to do when you want to do them, hitting those bucket list golf trips, traveling the world, experiencing these things that you wanted to do while you were working, but now you have the time to actually do it. So the go-go years are kind of the honeymoon phase of retirement. And typically what I find is that expenses might actually go up a little bit in the go-go years, but then you start to slow it down a little bit and enter the slow-go years. You've checked off a lot of those awesome bucket list trips. You're still doing some travel, but maybe not as frequently. Okay. And lifestyle stabilizes a little bit. And then later in retirement, at the end of retirement, then you're in your no-go years. And certainly there is a risk during that phase, the no-go years, where healthcare costs could spike. That's why you need to have a plan for that long-term care issue. But studies have also shown that over the course of retirement, retirees actually lag inflation by a full 1% a year. So if inflation is 3, retirees experience 2% a year. Again, that may not occur in a linear fashion. Okay. Because like I mentioned, the go-go years is, maybe you have some spikes in your spending. You're kind of like on there's a lot of pent up demand, if you will, for things that you wanted to do pre-retirement. But that reduction in inflation of your spending over time in your slow go and no go years will really help free you up to spend a little bit more in those go go years while health is still in your favor. So try to build your plan to accommodate these spending changes. Don't just run the risk of, hey, I'm going to assume these expenses are going to inflate at 3% for the next 40 years. That's going to potentially have you retiring way too late. But as I mentioned, if you do this, okay, if you are aggressively spending in those go-go years, those guardrails are critical, okay? Need the flexibility of those guardrails to reassess your withdrawal rate, okay? Because the market's going to drive what your withdrawal rate is from that part of the portfolio, okay? And if you retire into a downturn, like a recession or a bear market or something like the lost decade, okay? The lost decade over the last 40 years, that has been the worst time to retire, starting in 2000. And nobody has a crystal ball. No one knows what the future holds, but the lost decade came right off the heels of a significant boom in the tech industry. With the tech boom, late 80s into the 90s, returns were insane. So if you retired in the 80s, you're pretty comfortable. But then if you retire in 2000, not so great. Okay. And just a little teaser on this one, I'm doing a back test right now. The video is going to be coming up this Thursday on YouTube. So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube and hit that notifications button. But I'm doing a back test right now because one of our clients is unexpectedly retiring a little bit earlier than he had planned. Okay. And this is another thing we talk about as well, is things happen. And right now, companies restructuring, working remotely is not an option anymore. And they want to move to Florida and enjoy retirement. So at 56 years old, he is going to be entering into full retirement. A little unnerving for him, but we are planning for a 40-year time horizon, okay? And I'm going to use the exact rate of withdrawal beginning 40 years ago. So starting in 1986 through 2025 to see how that portfolio was sustained over 40 years. And I just mentioned we had a solid bull in the 80s and 90s. So late 80s into the 90s, I should say. So things looked pretty good. But then I did that same back test starting in 2000, and it was a completely different result. So make sure to check out that YouTube video. And like I said, make sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube. But really important, this guardrail concept. And like I said, I'm going to put that PDF in the show notes about those four decision rules. Very, very important to be able to pivot if you do retire into a downturn or something like the lost decade. Okay, number 5, something that's also going to be very important as well. And one of my favorite concepts in general for the retirees that we've been working with that have been retired for 10 or 15 years. Okay, they've maybe past the go-go years. They're starting to slow it down a little bit. And all of a sudden, they're like, you know what? I've got kind of more money than I need. Required minimum distributions are kicking in. They don't need to spend it all. Okay, so they're starting to do some donations via the QCD strategy. One of our favorite tax strategies on this podcast in our firm is qualified charitable distributions, where you can donate money directly from an IRA to charity without paying any taxes. And if you're taking required minimum distributions, that reduces the RMD dollar for dollar. So thinking about your favorite charities, thinking about your beneficiaries, your adult children, okay? And thinking about the idea that if you lived until 100, your adult children might be 70 years old at that point, maybe 75 or maybe even 80 if you started pretty young, all right? So this concept of like utility of money, and this comes from the Die with Zero book, where the utility of money does have diminishing returns the older you get. Because as we talked about, the slow go years happen. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen for all of us, and even the no-go years. And if you didn't enjoy the money in your go-go years, you lost the utility of those dollars. Same thing with legacy, okay? So thinking about the age at which your kids may inherit those assets, if you did in fact live until 100, may have you rethink a little bit about what legacy means. And maybe rewinding the tape, maybe 15, 20 years prior to that, maybe their kids were going through private school, or maybe you have grandkids going to college, or maybe your adult child, maybe they're starting a business and, they're living off savings and had no money, right? I know a little bit about that, but thinking about the utility of those funds at that point in time versus when you pass away and maybe they're already retired, that's what I'm talking about with this idea of giving with a warm hand rather than a cold one, okay? Because legacy is not just about what you leave behind, it's how you're remembered. And wouldn't it be really cool if you were giving to charity or giving funds to your beneficiaries, your adult children, and actually seeing what they're doing with those funds. It could also help drive what you do from an estate planning perspective. Okay. If you're giving money to one of your adult sons and they're spending all of it on sports gambling, that's a problem. Okay. Which, by the way, sports gambling, big issue right now in our country. I think it's one of those things that there's a lot of dark secrets out there for individuals. I just know this from talking to friends of mine and colleagues and just people in general. Sports betting is so mainstream, and the addiction that sports betting has and the ability to just place bets on your phone anytime, anywhere, I think that's a big problem. But anyways, I digress. If you're gifting money to your kids and they're blowing it on stupid things, you may rethink how you structure your estate plan. On the flip side, if you're gifting money and your kids are putting it away for their child's college, or they're using those funds to buy their homes, like that, those are smart things. Or maybe they're contributing to their own Roth accounts or HSAs, whatever that might be. That will also help kind of validate leaving money to them when you're no longer here, because you've worked hard to get to this point and you don't want your wealth squandered by beneficiaries who are not managing their money properly. And it's also could potentially be a great teaching experience too about, hey, not going to tell you what to do with the gift. There's no strings attached, but here's what I might do if I were in your situation. Okay. And you have the relationship with your beneficiaries, you know them the best. And so I think just considering, hey, do I have the capacity to give during my lifetime? Does that make sense based on my expectation to potentially live until 100 or even 95 years old? That's what I'm talking about. And if you do have that capacity, come up with a plan. Okay. The great thing right now, we have an annual exclusion and a lifetime exclusion, and they're both pretty high. You can give up to $19,000 a year per recipient in 2026 without having to file any gift tax return. Okay. So if you have 2 adult children, you could give 38 grand. Okay. If you're married, double that. If they're married, double that. Okay. There's no limitation on the recipients and who those people are. Obviously, you're probably not just giving money to random strangers, but if it's family members, you'd probably be more prone to give money to them. So that's a lot of money you can give during your lifetime. And another benefit is it kind of takes the growth out of your portfolio, especially if you're running into potential estate tax issues. Get rid of that growth out of your portfolio and give it to your children, your adult children, your grandkids, or your favorite charities, because I promise you, they probably need it more today than 20, 30, or even 40 years down the road. So again, the consideration here is, when is the greatest utility of your legacy? Is it when you're no longer here? Is it during your lifetime? Or maybe it's a combination of the two. Whatever it is, I think having thoughtful conversations with your spouse, with your advisors, and coming up with a plan that's thoughtful, because at the end of the day, you also don't want to give all of your money away and now you're a burden on them later on in life because you don't have a buffer for the end of your financial plan. So there's definitely a fine line there, and it definitely needs to be, the pros and cons must be weighed. Okay. You must have the capacity to be able to do this for that strategy to make sense. So of course, living longer can absolutely be a blessing. Who knows? Maybe it's not. Maybe everyone's living longer, but we've all lost our minds. No one's able to do anything. If I can play golf, I'm good. I'd love to live until 100 if I'm still playing golf. But it could be a blessing, but it could also be a big challenge for folks retiring today. And with technology evolving so quickly, it's very likely that modern medicine is going to evolve quickly as well. So that's why this idea of longevity planning, this idea of living until 100 is so important. So again, having that solid income base, having that fixed income base, super important. Making sure you can protect against not only risk and volatility in your portfolio, but also the risk of inflation, the risk of longevity eating away at your purchasing power over the duration of a 40-year time horizon. Okay. And then also thinking about the tax impact, not only during your lifetime, but also your beneficiary's lifetime. Okay. Thinking about your long-term care plan. Who's going to take care of me if something were to happen? Okay. Who are my loved ones? How do I protect my loved ones from a long-term care event? Okay. And then thinking about legacy, thinking about your impact on this earth. Again, because it's not just about how much you leave, it's about how you're remembered. All super important. So my recommendation to you is review your guaranteed income sources. Look at your Social Security strategy. Make sure you maximize not only the lifetime benefits while you're here, but also while the surviving spouse is alive too. Stress test your plan. What if you lived until 100 years old? Would your plan hold up? Okay. And then again, review your investment strategy. Review your investment portfolio. Does a 60-40 portfolio hold up? Or does a 75-25 portfolio hold up? Or even 80-20 or all stocks? Okay. Run different scenarios in your retirement plan to see, okay, what is the optimal allocation for not only my risk tolerance, but my risk capacity? And then again, making sure you have that long-term care plan. I don't care if you have $10 million saved for retirement, you still need a long-term care plan, okay? There still needs to be communication about who is doing what, where are the funds coming from, how are you going to pay for care? And again, I don't sell long-term care insurance, but I'm a big believer in the product, in this idea that long-term care insurance has freed up the clients that have it for our practice to enjoy retirement more, to spend more in retirement, to gift more in retirement, knowing that they have that risk taken care of on the front end. And as always, if you're looking for some help with this, because I know a lot of this can be overwhelming, if you're looking for some help on your retirement plan, this is what we do day in and day out for our clients. And if you want to learn more about working with me one-on-one, just visit my website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can start with the retirement readiness questionnaire that is linked in the show notes. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure to follow the podcast. Make sure to consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, and then also consider giving us that 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps us reach and impact more people, which is our goal here. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next week.